we're going to really, using these three arguments over here, we're going to make sure that we have a solid foundation that we can build upon, and then you'll see that I'll go back to that foundation as questions become more and more challenging. And I'm going to ask you to recite the definition of an assumption. I'm going to ask you to recite what does what does a conclusion do. I'm going to ask you to decide how's the logical structure built over there. And as you kind of give me your answers, you'd be able to figure out why something is wrong and why something is correct. Once we have that foundation, we're going to apply this on to really challenging questions. These are really, really difficult questions, probably the most challenging questions that the test can throw at you. Our goal would be to make sure that we demonstrate that you can apply uh, the principles that you've learned on difficult questions, and even though these questions are difficult, you're able to get to the correct answer easily and with confidence. I think it's not just about getting to the right answer, it's about making sure that you get to it for the right reason so that you can replicate that performance on the real exam. And then we're going to really look at, what should you do next? What should be next steps? How do you build upon this so that you perform consistently, so that your ability improves, and you can highlight that ability on the test. Okay. So in many ways, what we're going to really look at is where you are today, what's important to SCR, and then how can you get there. Okay. So let's talk about um, let's talk about this. Yeah, GMAT versus GMAT focus. That piece is really important. Harvard, for example, is not taking the GMAT focus this year, unless and until, as this poster said, you're aiming for 2+2. And for them, this is, I think, really critical, where they don't want any confusion overall. And that's, I think, a neat thing. But then if you're looking at the future, GMAT focus is the future. All right, let's talk about your current approach to critical reasoning. Now, before I do that, I want to just make sure what pre-thinking is. You guys should understand, because a lot of people think pre-thinking is predicting the answer, and they just confuse pre-thinking with a term called paraphrasing, which is something that a term that Kaplan introduced. So pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. And this is, I think, really, really important. Why? Because pre-thinking in many ways was an e-GMAT term. We were the first company to define pre-thinking. We were the first company to come up with a framework for pre-thinking and overall. So really, really important. Pre-thinking is not about predicting the answer. It's about making sure that you understand the logical structure of the argument, and then you before you look at answer choices. And the reason why pre-thinking is so powerful, the reason why it powers 3 out of 5 700 plus scores as reported on GMAT Club, is that it ensures that you comprehend the argument before your mind is polluted by the extra information that answer choices provide to you. Okay. So yeah, Tripti, let me just say there's someone who really says audio is not available, or let me put in a poll question here. I think you guys can still hear me clearly, if I understand, because I can see the audio is being transmitted um, properly from the system. All right. Perfect. Thank you. My LinkedIn account. All right. Let me just share the link to my LinkedIn account as well. Here's the link to my LinkedIn account for those of you who want to join. Okay. So with that, I want to ask this question. Which of the two methodologies do you follow? So there are two methodologies typically that people follow when answering assumption questions. One is they read the argument, they go to the answer choice, and they come back to the argument till they reach the final candidate. The second is they read the argument, spend some time to pre-think an assumption, and then go to the answer choices. So I have a poll question here. I want you to tell me, which methodology do you follow? I have about 102 students here on the webinar. I want to see that I get at least 60 answers. I right now have about 30 responses, 40 responses, 50 responses, 55, 59. Let's get a couple more. All right. Let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. 66% of you follow the follow methodology one, where you look at the read the argument, go to the answer choices, and come back to that back and forth. Or 66% of you do that, and 34% of you follow the pre-thinking approach. All right. Let me hide this as well. For those of you who follow methodology one, you guys predominantly spend a majority of your time doing back and forth between answer choices, where you go to an answer choice, come back to the argument to validate, come back to the answer choices. And we're going to really look at, for me, for those of you who follow this approach, methodology one, my goal would be to make sure that you give pre-thinking a fair shake, and make sure that you apply this and understand why it works. For those of you who already follow the pre-thinking approach, my goal would be for you to understand the core skills that you need to get better at pre-thinking. Why is it that you need to focus on building those core skills, and so that you move forward on that pre-thinking journey. Okay. All right. So pre-thinking is a method. So whenever you talk about uh, applying a strategy or a method, you've got to. It typically is built on an understanding that you know certain skills. The fact that there's a certain foundation, and the same thing holds true for pre-thinking. It works if you have a certain foundation. If you don't have a foundation, then you can pre-think all you want. Your mind's going to be blank. And one of the most important skills that foundation is that pre-thinking is built on, and in fact pretty much all of GMAT verbal, and then now coming forward to this GMAT focus as well, as built on, is that skill to visualize information. So what visualizing means is, as the word implies, it's about imagining what you read, and just seeing that happen in your mind. So when, for example, when if a conclusion says that the seawall is going to be able to sustain the ocean waves generated by the tornado, so you want to visualize information, you want to visualize a seawall that's standing tall to the ocean waves, you want to see the ocean waves striking the seawall in your mind. You want to see something like that, and then at that point, if the argument wants you to weaken it, you want to really just say, look, think of scenarios in which the waves may actually go over the seawall, or maybe under the seawall, or may go through the wall by breaking it. And that's really important. And you visualize not just the conclusion, but also the argument itself, as to why is it that the author is saying that, and then think accordingly in the context. And you're going to see us apply this. The second thing is linking statements, which is what we call as the logical structure of the argument. See, our arguments are really well made, and so usually when the author arrives at a conclusion, there's a basis for it. There's a justification for it. Understand how the author justifies the conclusion, because usually, if you understand that, then pre-thinking becomes easier, as well as getting to the correct answer, and that becomes easier as well. And once you do that, then this is the easiest part, which is the falsification question, which is a question that you ask during in the pre-thinking process. So Ria has a question. Where can we get the recording? Ria, you'll get the recording in an email in about 10 hours from now. Okay. So with that, I want you to. So the reason why we go about this process and we go on about building those skills is that once, as humans, we are really good at reasoning, as long as we can visualize what we want to reason. And an example of this is this particular question. I'm going to throw a very simple argument at you, and I want you to tell me what the assumption is. Here is the argument. Read the argument and tell me what does the author assume here. Type the argument, press enter, and even though you won't see your answer appear in the box, it's being stored. So press enter, and once I have about 20 responses, then I'm going to broadcast results. All right. So put those answers in. All right, guys, I have about 7 answers here, but I have some people who are putting those answers in the Q&A box. Please don't put those answers in the Q&A box. Q&A is the box below the presentation. That's for your questions and my answers. Put your answers on in the long box on the right-hand side. I have about 12 answers there. So for those of you who put your answers in the Q&A box, copy paste them in the long box so that before I delete them. Okay. Some very, very good answers over here. Ivy League colleges do not admit a score. Uh, uh, Someone who scored 500 on the GMAT, you need to score higher than 500 if you want to get to an Ivy League college. And lots and lots of answers which are along the same lines. And I think the nice thing about this is that uh, you guys are really focused on you focus on Ivy League college, you focus on the score of 500, you focus on the threshold itself, and because you're very familiar with the scenario, you're able to get to the correct answer fairly quickly. So essentially, when you think about the structure of this argument, the author presents a data point where someone scored 500 on the GMAT, and based on this data point, the author makes a claim. And essentially, what's the claim? And while making that claim, the author makes an assumption that for a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe, and that's important, is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And that someone like Joe is really important because in the conclusion, the author says he will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Okay. So with that, I want you to write down in the same box what is the general definition of an assumption. What's the proper definition of an assumption? Write that down. The gap between premises and conclusion, something assumed uh, to be fact in order to reach a conclusion. Okay, an assumption is a way one gets from information to conclusion. Okay, a gap which is not explicitly stated but is obvious between the premise and conclusion. It's not obvious. That's why you guys are here. If it were obvious, then you guys won't need to attend a webinar to learn how to get better at it. Assumption is the basis on which someone, where did it go? So a lot of people use the word uh, obvious, and let me just be very clear. An assumption is something that's not obvious all the time. For simple arguments, it may be yes. A required link between the premise and the conclusion. That's a good answer. So an assumption, the proper definition of an assumption, and I'm going to ask you to write down 3 things in this webinar. This is one of those 3 things. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Write this down because whenever you get a challenging question and you're confused between 2 answers, this will come to your rescue. An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So when you think about it, there are certain attributes that this definition brings about. First of all, since an assumption is an unstated idea, which means that it provides new information that or information that you can't infer from the factual part of the argument. And this is where I say an assumption may not always be obvious because it is an unstated idea. Any information that can be inferred from the argument cannot be an assumption. An assumption always provides new information. The second thing is that it is required for the conclusion. Without an assumption, there would be ways to break the conclusion down, or in many ways, an assumption plugs gaps in the argument. That's why it's think of a leaky roof. An assumption is something that plugs that leak, which is if you want to have a roof that doesn't leak, then assumption is required in many ways. Okay, and then every assumption that's there will satisfy both these conditions. A statement that doesn't satisfy either one of these is never going to be a correct answer choice. This is the fundamental definition of what an assumption is. Now, 95 to 96% of your questions play on this aspect of it, but 2 to 3% of questions also play on this aspect. We're going to see one question that also plays on number 1, but pretty much our focus is going to be on number 2 because that's kind of where more of the fun is. Okay. So if you want to visualize the role played by assumption, and this is really important because we want to make sure you do this. Think of this house as an argument, and where the roof is the conclusion, and you have these three pillars that are supporting the conclusion. Each one of these pillars is in many ways a premise. A premise is the statement that makes the conclusion stronger. It strengthens the conclusion. It increases your belief in the conclusion. Okay, let's call them one, two, and three. Now, each of these three pillars is there. It keeps the roof upright. Let's assume we remove pillar number one. The roof, well, it's slightly weakened, but it still stays upright, which means pillar number one is not an assumption. Let's assume we remove pillar number three as well. This roof still stays upright. Then pillar number three is also not an assumption. Um, Now let's bring everything back, and while keeping pillars one and three intact, let's assume we remove pillar number two and the roof caves in. This is what an assumption does. It prevents the roof from caving in, which means pillar number two was indeed an assumption. And the reason I want to kind of really talk about this is because when you look at your answer choices, there are many statements that may seem like assumption. That increase your belief in the conclusion, but they're not the correct answer. And they're like pillars number one and three. They're what we call as strengtheners, as potential answer choices in an assumption argument. A strengthener does increase your belief, but it's not that must be true in pillar. It's not that required pillar that's there. And that I think is a really, really critical distinction. And we're going to see that through four examples later on in this webinar. Okay. In other words, the way I want to really just say is an assumption is that essential pillar that's required for the roof to stay upright or for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. So what does this must be true mean? It means that if the content of the argument, if the information provided by the argument is not true, then there are ways to break that conclusion down. Okay. Let's kind of apply what we just learned on this really simple argument, and then we're going to move on towards more complex arguments. So, same argument, and then we say, okay, what does falsification of the conclusion means? The conclusion gets falsified if Joe gets into an Ivy League college with that score of 500. Okay, so how do you figure out? I know how my conclusion breaks. How do you figure out whether an answer choice is correct? So we said this is my correct answer choice. Let's ask ourselves: is that must be true? Does this satisfy that must be true condition? Or, in other words, will Joe get admission into an Ivy League college if this statement is no longer true? Now, this is something that's important for you to understand. When you say a statement is no longer true, by definition, what you're saying is that its negated instance is true. And that's a really important thing that you need to understand. So, when you say this statement is no longer true, by definition, what you're saying is this is true, which means the score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this becomes acceptable, then what happens to my conclusion? It breaks down. Why? Because if a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable, then I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get an admission in an Ivy League college. Now, some of you may be saying, Rajat, how do you say when a statement is not true that its negated instance becomes true? So let's take a few examples. Let's take this statement: Harvard has the best MBA program. If you say that's not true, by definition, you're also saying this: the fact that Harvard does not have the best MBA program or an MBA program that's just as good or better than Harvard exists. If you say John runs faster than David, and if you say that's not true, then by definition, you're also saying that John does not run faster than David, or David is just as fast, or maybe even faster than John. Can you see this? If you said this is not true, you're saying this is true. You're saying this is not true. Then you're saying this is true. Yes, no. Okay. So when you say a statement is not must be true, when you reject an answer statement, then you're really saying, hey, its negated instance can become true. Okay. Now, it cuts the other way as well. If you have an incorrect answer choice, then your conclusion will not break down in the presence of its negated instance. Let's take another example. Same argument. Let's take this answer choice. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. We want to figure out, is that must be true? Could this be an assumption? Let's look at this. Okay. So we're going to really see what happens when you say this is not a must be true statement. Okay. So if this is not must be true, then this becomes true, which means a score of 500 on the GMAT is now considered a good score. Now, if that happens, will Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? The answer is not really. Why? Because if you look at this argument itself, it's not predicated on the fact as to whether you call the score of 500 a good score or a great score or a bad score or a below average score. It just is built on that numerical number. In other words, the logic of the argument would remain the same even if that score of 500 would be replaced by 700. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. I can be a bit slow. Do you want me to speak a bit slow, or do you want me to go a bit slow? And then the same could apply to others as well. Speak a bit slow. Okay, I'm gonna speak a bit slow. All right. Pace is fine. Good. Okay, one thing that that this is heavy information. Let me just be very clear. This may seem simple. It's heavy information. The beauty of it is that you're going to see me repeat this 4 more times in different contexts, and that's the whole principle behind this. So first of all, and you will get these slides too. Okay, so you will get these slides, you will get the recording, and you will see this repeated a few times. Can I explain this again? Okay. The question that you're asking is this statement, let's go back, is this statement a must be true statement? Is it required for my conclusion to hold true? And remember, this is my conclusion over here in that blue bar. Okay. Or as you can read over here, will this conclusion become invalid if this statement no longer holds true? Now, if this statement no longer holds true, if this statement no longer holds true, then its negated instance becomes true. So what is its negated instance? You just take the word not, cross it, and you say now a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score. If this happens, then will Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? The answer is no. Why? Because when you look at this argument, do you see a good or bad over here? No, you don't see a good or bad. It's built on that number over there. That number could be called excellent, good, bad, anything. The conclusion will still remain the same. Okay. So even in the presence of the negated instance, my conclusion doesn't break down, which means this is not a must be true statement. Okay. We're going to take, so this was an easier answer choice to reject. We're going to take a more challenging question. A challenging answer choice. The quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into an Ivy League college. And we're going to ask ourselves, is this a true statement? Is this a must be true statement? The same process, we're going to ask ourselves, is that must be true, which means that will my conclusion break down if this statement is no longer true? So if we say this statement over here is no longer true, then its negated instance becomes true, the same thing, which means that the quality of an applicant's essay starts to play a significant role. It does play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into it. Now, will Joe get into an Ivy League college with a score of 500 if the quality of his essay start to play a significant role? No, because if he doesn't even meet that minimum threshold, then those essays don't even start to come into picture. Okay, so yes, even though the essays may start to play a role, they only play a role once he crosses that threshold. Okay, so that's why this isn't must be true. Okay. So this was just the basics of what an assumption is. If you go through our introduction to assumption file, it actually has 10 such examples in there. The goal really is for you to understand what an assumption is before we start to deal with more complex arguments. Okay. But again, there are 3 skills that we will focus on. One is the ability to visualize information. The second is build that logic. And then the third is formulating that falsification question. The fundamental thing is, for the correct answer choice, when you find the correct assumption, you're going to find that the conclusion does not hold true in the presence of the negated version of that answer choice. For the incorrect one, when you negate that answer choice, the conclusion stays intact. Nothing happens to that conclusion. In many ways, what I'm trying to tell you is, when you think about 2 answer choices that you're confused between, say one is close and the other one is the correct answer, that close answer choice has no impact on my conclusion. It's not close. It's designed to make you think that it's close. It's not a close answer choice. It's an absolutely incorrect answer choice. And we're going to see that through examples here. Okay, so this is a basic foundation of this. We are now going to do a pre-thinking exercise. We're going to up the ante, but we're not going to learn anything new. We're going to apply what we have learned on 4 to 5 examples, and that way we're going to enhance your understanding. The first thing is I'm going to give you an argument, and you guys, I'm going to ask you to pre-think an assumption. There will be no answer choices. All you will have is an argument to go with, to go on, and you will tell me what does the author assume here. Okay, are you guys ready? Yes, no, perfect. And again, this may seem slightly complex. You may really say, hey, there are certain parts that I'm not clear about, and you'd be that's an absolutely fine feeling to have, because those things will become more and more clear as we go through these examples. Okay. All right, so the process that we're going to follow is, I'm going to give you this argument. I'm going to give you 2.5, in fact, even 3 minutes to put in your pre-thinking. Then I'm going to go through my pre-thinking process. And you're going to really see, if you follow a logical approach, how answer choices jump right at you. Okay. So here is the argument. Make sure you have a pen and paper ready. Go through the argument slowly, breathe. Don't just ask yourself what's the assumption. Just read and really say, what is the author trying to achieve through this argument? What's the basis of his assumption? And then basis of his conclusion. And then as you do that right, you're going to see that getting to assumptions is a lot easier. Okay. So with that, good luck. Here is your argument. I'm going to mute myself for 2.5 minutes. Hey Siri, set a timer for 2.5 minutes. All right, guys, it's about 2.5 minutes in. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. Get your answers in. Okay, I have 5 answers. All right, let's get a few more. 3, 2. Didn't know you had to type in. Type it in now. You have to put your assumptions in the short answer box. 3, 2, and 1. Let me broadcast the results so you guys can see what others have put in. Tenured professors are equally able to teach well, but are not teaching just because they're not incentivized. Okay. Are they not incentivized at all? The reward system dictates professors' actions. Um, Tenured professors are just as able to teach, but they don't do well because they're not incentivized. Um, Tenured professors are better than full-time professors or lecturers, is what you meant, full-time lecturers, because tenured professors are rewarded better. Okay, let's look at that. Full-time lecturers do not indulge in research, and thus the quality of teaching is bad. It actually is against the conclusion. An assumption always strengthens the conclusion. So the reason why I do this exercise, and I wish I had more time to do such exercises, it just tells you that without a structured process, how your thought process goes about, and that I think is really important, not only in the context of the GMAT, but essentially the whole point of what an MBA is, because in the end, when you finish your degree, what you're doing is making decisions, and this is what an MBA is supposed to do: help you make decisions. That's all that an MBA is about. When you do an analysis, when you become a consultant, you help others make decisions. So, and this is what you're doing in the context of critical reasoning, which is why, in my opinion, it is probably one of the most important aspects of doing an MBA, of just being able to reason critically. Okay, so let's kind of look at this here, which is how do we go about doing this? The first thing is, let's kind of understand what the conclusion is, and to understand what the conclusion is, we're going to visualize that the conclusion. We're going to first isolate the conclusion, then we will assign numbers to conclusion. Okay, then we look at the logical structure. How does the author justify that conclusion? And then we will ask our pre-thinking question. And if we do a good job of this, if we do a good job of this, then this would be easy. This would be really, really easy. And you're going to see that. And which is why, for those of you who want to get better at pre-thinking, the key to getting better at pre-thinking lies in doing steps 1 and 2 easily. Okay. Now, how do we go about pre-thinking assumptions? So it just the pre-thinking process is built on the foundation of that very definition of what an assumption is. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means, if you were to go back to our visualization, it's that essential pillar. Now, if you were to build a house, and if you were to really say, hey, where do I put essential pillars? Your first question would be, let's figure out where my roof is caving in. You'll simulate overall the design of your house, and you will see, where is it my roof caving in? So, and wherever the roof starts to cave in, you're going to put a pillar, because you don't want the roof to cave in. So in other words, without assumptions, because an argument can have multiple assumptions, the conclusion will break down. In other words, your assumption is built around the scenarios that may break the conclusion down. So to find assumptions, let's kind of figure out, let's look at the argument and see, where is it that my conclusion breaks? And all we have to do is put assumptions there. They're those essential pillars that the argument does not have today. That's something that you have to place. And if you have to place those essential pillars, then you have to figure out, where does my, or how does my argument break down today? Does that make sense? You have to put those essential pillars, figure out where the argument's breaking down. Few more yeses, please. Why works. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. So let's look at this. So fundamentally, this is the second thing that I want you to write down. This is the falsification or the pre-thinking question. This question remains the same regardless of an argument. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? This is something that we're going to ask for every question that's out there. So write this down. The first thing was the definition of an assumption, which is an unstated idea required for the conclusion to be valid. The second is the fundamental structure of the falsification or the pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? All right, so this is our argument. I want you to tell me which statement over here is the main conclusion. I'm going to give you three statements here. Statement 1, 2, and 3. I want you to tell me which statement, according to you, is the main conclusion. I have 90 students here. I want at least 50 responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? You've gone through this argument. You've spent 3 minutes on this argument. This should be really quick. I have 20 responses. I want 50. Which statement is the main conclusion? Once I get 50, I'm going to broadcast results. Come on, you guys are here to score a 730 or higher, at least about 80% of you. Uh, but 90+% want to get to a 700 or higher. You've got to participate if you want to get there. You've got to really tell yourself where you're right, where you're wrong, so that you get that personalized feedback. All right, I have 53 responses. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. And you can see statement 2 is the most popular answer choice. That is indeed the correct answer. Statement 2 is your main conclusion. But then you can see more than half the class is confused between, has chosen an answer other than statement 2. The definition of the main conclusion is what is it that the author wants you to believe in from this argument? What's the reason why the author has written this argument? And when you try and answer that question, what you're going to find is the reason that the author has written this argument is statement number 2, where he wants to say, hey, the reason why professors don't do as good a job is because of the reward system that the professors have. Okay. Um, that's something that's out there. All right. Statement number 3, and Ashutosh has a good question. He says, is that an intermediate conclusion? No, it's a premise. It's a fact. An intermediate conclusion means it's a claim which we can doubt. We are not going to doubt statement number 3 because the author is telling us that statement. Statement number 3 is written to make statement number 2 more believable. It's written to support statement number 2. It says the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. This is written to support statement number 2. Okay. Statement number 1 is a fact. Statement number 1 says a lot of people choose statement 1 because you have this word concludes over here, and say a lot of people choose this because they think the word concludes exists. So it must be a conclusion. Now remember, in an argument, your conclusion is always by the author of the argument, not someone else. Okay. Statement number 1 is purely a fact. It sets the context for this argument. It's the foundation on which the argument is built. Why? Because statement number 1 provides us information that tenured professors or those on their way to tenure don't do as good a job as full-time lecturers do. So that's the foundation that the author takes. Based on this, the author states statement number 2, which is his main conclusion. And then to support his main conclusion, the author also states statement number 3. Okay. Is that clear to everyone? Why statement number 2 is the main conclusion and why statement number 1 or statement number 3, they're not the main conclusions? Okay. And some of, a few of you asked, why should we go through the course? It builds all of these skills step by step. And it ensures that you build those skills, which means it evaluates you as well. Okay. We talked about this. So then let's kind of visualize this overall. So this is my conclusion. You can see it's 2 written over here. So again, the key thing over here is that the author is not disputing report's finding. In fact, he's building on it to say that the reason by the professors don't do as good a job is because of the reward system that the system has for them. So in other words, if you were to visualize the statement, uh, is that let's assume that tenured professors help 40% of the students get significantly better, full-time lecturers get 70% of the students get significantly better overall. Okay. Now, the reason for this distinction is reward system. Now, my question for you, now I'm going to focus on statement number 3, and I have my whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? And you have these options here: just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both tenured faculty and lecturers, or neither of them. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Again, I want to see 50 answers here. I have 27, 32, 36, 46, 47. I want 50 answers here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? I have 50 answers. That's great. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. 75% of you said just in your faculty. You guys are absolutely correct. But again, you can see a quarter of the class is elsewhere. And if you look at the probabilistic aspect of it, if half of you can't get to the main conclusion, and another quarter can't get to, can't tell me what does statement 3 talk about, then the accuracy of this question already is at about 37%. Okay. And it's not because you don't know the answer choices, it's because you've not even understood the argument, just the pure joint probabilistic aspect of it. Okay. When you look at statement number three talks just about tenured faculty or professors. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater, this is a comparative word, emphasis on research than on teaching. What this is saying is just for tenured faculty, TF, maybe there's a 60% research emphasis on research and 40% on teaching. Okay. We don't know anything about lecturers, but for tenured faculty, maybe it's 60-40, maybe it's 70-30 overall. This word greater means the comparison between research versus teaching. It has nothing to do with lecturers. Let me just bring in my poll question, my short answer part here. Is that aspect clear? There's nothing about lecturers over here. And this is really important because we don't know anything about the reward system for the for lecturers. Okay. Good. Now, with that, let's kind of build up rethinking question. Remember, this was a generic form of this question. Under what circumstances, given the facts, will the conclusion break down? Now, let's translate this. This one has two aspects to it. We're going to fill in the blanks at 1 and 2. Okay. Here is a translation of this. Under what circumstances will the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? Remember, this is 2 and this is 2. Can you see the translation of conclusion breakdown to reward system not be responsible? I'm just going step by step. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance, given that this is 1 over here, 1, and this also is 1. Full-time lecturers do a better job, and reward system for professors places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. You could also put 2 as, if you don't want to use the word greater, say place a 70% emphasis on research and 30% on teaching. That would be just as good. Okay. Can you also see the translation of 1 to 1 over here? All right. Okay, so we have the falsification question, we have the argument. Under what circumstances would the reward system not cause a difference? Okay, there are two possible scenarios. What if lecturers have an identical reward system? Okay, and what if most tenured faculty do not act as per the reward systems? In both these scenarios, my conclusion will break down. Can you guys see that? In both these scenarios, I cannot blame the reward system. Remember, I'm not disputing the difference in performance. All I'm saying uh, is the reward system truly responsible for it? Okay. So if this breaks my conclusion, if this is where my roof is caving in, and my assumptions are that these scenarios are not possible. Non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system, or lecturers do not have an identical reward system. And then most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Okay, both of them are equally good assumptions. Both of them are correct. Okay. So if you use the pre-thinking questions methodically, you'll arrive at falsification scenarios. Once you do that, arriving at assumption becomes really simple. Okay. Now, a lot of you probably are worried about timing. How many of you are worried about timing? Saying, man, this is great, this is logical, but this seems to take a lot of time. There's just so many steps. There are no tricks built into it. Okay. So let me just present a fact to you. If you go to GMAT Club, if you look at 700 plus scores, go to the review section. GMAT Club does a phenomenal job of organizing their reviews chronologically. And you count the number of 700 plus scores reported for every prep company. What you're going to find is e-GMAT accounts for 60% of all 700 plus scores reported. Everyone else together accounts for just about 40%. And the reason why I want to really kind of put that fact here is because if these methods didn't work, we wouldn't have these numbers. Okay. And we wouldn't have such 5-star reviews as well. Now, when it comes to excelling on anything, and scoring 700, 730, 740 is akin to excelling at things. You have to go through a process of learning, and going through a process of learning means going through a process of skill building. Has anyone built a skill in the recent past, learned something new and gotten really good at it in the last 6 to 10 months? Has anyone done that? Built any skill? Learn how to play guitar, done well in sports. And I'm looking at folks who have improved tremendously in the last 10 months, or maybe you've done this 2 years ago. Stock market, okay. Now, fundamentally, if let's take an example of stock market. If you want to do well in the stock market, you want to really get really good at understanding the fundamentals of a company. You want to also get really good at understanding the emotion behind that stock. Both of these go into assessing whether to buy that stock or sell that stock. That's really so you've got to build those fundamentals. Once you build those fundamentals, then you'll get good at at understanding how the stock market works. And the as you build those fundamentals for the first time, for the second time, for the third time, you're going to take time building those fundamentals and figuring out how to read the various ratios against the stock, how to read the value of an assessment of various opinions, how to kind of read the market sentiment around it. Am I correct? For someone who got really good at doing well in the stock market, you've got to be able to do that. You also have to be able to kind of look at the historical data, do a time series analysis over there. Bottom line is, if you're trying to build a skill, and if that building that skill doesn't require you to go slow, then you're probably not learning something new. The same holds true for critical reasoning. The way you're going to feel is something like this. Let's say you're at point number one. This is your starting point, where your accuracy at questions is low and your time to answer questions is this medium over here. And again, I don't have relevant numbers here because everyone over here is going to be at a different point. So I didn't want to put a number here. Okay. The first thing that's going to happen is, as you go embark on the pre-thinking journey, your accuracy will go up. At the same time, your time to answer questions will go up as well. How many of you have experienced this? Accuracy has gone up, time to answer questions has also gone up. And that's a very natural thing. Why? Because you're reading the argument slowly, you're taking time during the pre thinking process. And as you're doing that, you would find that you're learning new things because there are these constructs in the argument that you didn't focus on, which means you never learned how to visualize them. Now you're able to, you're learning how to visualize them. And those of you who for whom this is the process of learning has taken place after a very long time, you would be like this individual over here. It says, man, this is already taking longer for me to answer questions using this way. I'm already worried about timing. Why the hell should I follow this process? Because this is, I'm worried about timing. This seems to be a longer process. My shortcut approach seems to work well. Yes, my accuracy is lower, but at least my time is lower. How many of you think about this guy over here? And then typically, these are folks uh, who are uh, 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 who are essentially who've not learned stuff over there. Now, people who continue to believe in this process, what's going to happen with you guys is, as you continue to do pre-thinking better, your ability to visualize constructs will become better. Your ability to distinguish the conclusion from the premises is going to improve as you do more arguments. And a point will come where you'll realize, hey, my accuracy is going to continue to go up. I'm making fewer mistakes, but I'm now solving questions at much faster than what I used to be. As you can see, as you go from 2 to 3, um, your time to answer questions is lower than what you started with. Point 3 is towards the left hand side of point 1. And that's what I call as when you reach the hysteresis with regards to uh, critical reasoning. And once you reach point number 3, you will not move back. Someone who says, I'm already at 3, this, if your accuracy at, first of all, I don't know if you understand what 3 is. 3 is a situation where you get better than 1. It's not an independent situation, which means that you're already doing pre-thinking if you are at 3. This is a pre-thinking chart. Some people may naturally be good at medium level questions just because they have a very strong foundation to begin with. Those people typically struggle with hard questions. Am I correct? You probably are here because you struggle with hard questions. So you have to use pre-thinking. And that's where pre-thinking provides the greatest value. Okay. But bottom line is this is a process of learning. And speed here, or time to answer questions here, is not a skill that you build. It's an outcome of of the fact that you're building those core skills, and it's going to happen automatically. Okay. So don't worry about timing. Focus on building that skill. And as you focus on building that skill, your brain will figure out how to visualize arguments better, how to connect statements better. And as those connections happen, um, then you're gonna get much faster at doing things. Okay. There are a few folks who've echoed the same sentiment. It says, understand the passage completely, take your time. This one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. This guy improved from a 35th percentile in CR to a 97th percentile, if memory serves me right, in about 20 days just by doing pre-thinking. The fundamentals for him were there. And he says, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. When it gets to 700 level questions, you have to pre-think. Why? Because so that you stay close to the logic that the author is trying to use and or using to arrive at the conclusion, and you reject out of scope answer choices. There's a guy who went from 520 in mocks to 740 on the actual GMAT and says, pre-thinking primes the mind, and we're constantly on our toes while reading an RC paragraph. So pre-thinking is really, really important in RC as well, or RCR question stem. And essentially, it makes sure that you stay razor sharp. Okay, this is the journey that you will go through. Remember this journey. Yeah, if you're not taking longer to solve questions, there's something wrong. You're not learning anything. Okay. With that, I want to emphasize on this example number 3, which will it seems like a very simple example, but if you don't pre-think in this, you're going to find that you're confused between answer choices, and essentially you kind of doing it back and forth. But if you focus on pre-thinking, if you build a logical structure, if you focus on building that falsification question and answering it, you're going to be able to reject the correct answer or get to the correct answer fairly easily. Okay, so here are your answer choices. I'm going to remove broadcast results. Here is the question. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes to answer this question. Good luck, guys. Hey Siri, put a timer for 2.5 minutes. Okay, last 15 seconds. Get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. This is how you guys polled. Choices B and E were really popular. Choice C was quite popular as well. Choices A and D were somewhat popular, not as popular overall. So clearly, the max accuracy in this question can be 33%. So many of you were confused. Any question where the accuracy is lower than 50% is a hard question. So, 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 so clearly, this is something that many of you were confused with. Although the argument here is fairly simple. So let's see how we'll go about answering this question using pre-thinking. And am I correct? The answer choices messed you up. The argument seemed fine, but the answer choices were seemed really complex, right? And they are okay. So what's going on? We want to finance road repairs, and the highway commission is considering a 50% increase in the toll, and the toll currently is 10 cents per mile. Okay, and the commissioner says that as we kind of increase the toll, we're going to increase the annual revenue by at least 50%, if not more. Okay, that's the simple argument, and the author really says, what's the assumption that the highway commissioner makes. So let's kind of visualize the conclusion. And again, even though it seems really simple, I want to kind of make sure we go through the process. We emphasize, we spend time on visualizing the conclusion. So what the highway commissioner is saying is that the annual revenue will go by at least 50%, which means last year the annual revenue was $1 million. Next year or current year, the annual revenue would be at least 1.5. Maybe it's going to be $1.6 million, and maybe it's going to be 2, maybe it's going to be 2.1. Doesn't matter, but it's going to be at least 1.6 if it was 1 million last year. Okay, so how do we estimate annual revenue? I want you guys to tell me. Given this argument, how do we estimate annual revenue? What's the relationship that we're going to use to estimate annual revenue? Okay, you say someone says trips per toll, miles traveled times $0.15, proportional to distance traveled. And you can really see, total vehicles times miles. As you see over here, there are no trips in this case. There are no vehicles in this case. Really, annual revenue in very simplified terms is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles, right? If you were to just read the argument and if you were to build that logical relationship, you'd say toll per mile into total number of toll miles. All right. Is that clear? Is that clear? Right? Simple. It's there from the argument itself. Now, what we are told is, let's go back over here, that toll per mile is going to go up by 50%. So the falsification question, remember this was the structure of the falsification question. Under what circumstances, given the fact in the argument, will the conclusion break down? So under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50%? That's my conclusion breakdown. Remember, this was 2. This is 2 over here. And this is 1, facts in the argument. And this is 1 over here. That toll per mile has increased by 50%. So given this logical relationship, if toll per mile has already gone up by 50%, in what scenario will the annual revenue not go up by 50%? What's the only scenario that you can think from here? What's the only scenario possible? If the product of two numbers, one of them has already increased by 50%, in what scenario would the result not go up? If the number of miles reduces. That's the only scenario. Correct? Is this clear to everyone? Total number of toll miles traveled on the highway reduces. And the assumption is, as he said, driven does not increase. Remember, the highway may be 10 miles long, Depending on the number of vehicles, the number of toll miles driven could be 1 million miles on it. Yeah, usage is the total number of toll miles. Let's kind of look at this. We're going to look at every answer choice. But is this clear? Is this clear? Yes, yes, yes. Good. Now, what's my fundamental definition of an assumption? Can you guys recite that definition again before we look at the answer choices? What's the definition of an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Absolutely correct. Yes. Okay. With that in mind, let's look at the answer choices. Let me just bring in the poll question. This is how you guys polled. Okay, this is what you chose over here. All right. So choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. So what this is saying is last year, if we made 1 million trips, this year we will also make at least 1 million trips. We could make 1.1, 1.2, but we'll make at least 1 million trips this year as well. Now, is that required? Is that must be true? What if this year, instead of making 1 million trips, if we make 900K trips? Okay, if we make 900K trips, then can the number of toll miles not be higher still? If each trip is longer? Yeah, length of trip is important. So my question is that must be true? Is this must be true? The answer is no. This is not must be true. Actually, let me hold on. I'm gonna bring in the color palette and I'm gonna remove. This is not must be true. Why? Because the total miles traveled will still remain the same, even if the number of trips goes down by 10%. Why? Because each trip could be longer, each trip could be 30% longer, and that would compensate for this. Okay. First, is that clear? I'm going to address this out. Please put the doubts in the Q&A part. That way those doubts are cataloged. Okay. Is this clear why choice B is wrong? Because it's not must be true. It's a great strengthener. It's not an assumption. Okay. Now let me address that question over here that this particular student had, which was how do we figure out the number of toll miles? And I'm going to bring a whiteboard over here. I'm going to bring in a new thing over here. So a toll highway is like this road where you have multiple posts and you may have an entry point here and and you may have an exit point here. So this is entry or and this is exit. You actually, well, most toll highways work both ways. So it could be it's entry at both ends. And if you go back, if you enter here and go back here, this is exit number 1, this is exit number 2, and this is exit number 3. So depending on that, you the number of miles are is calculated. Is that clear for to the person who really says how does the number of miles change depending on because for you the assumption really was that regardless of how you travel on it, the number of miles per trip would remain the same. Is that clear? Yes, no? Okay. All right. Let's look at choice C. So, but the fundamental thing over here is that must be true. And if you did the pre-thinking right, you're going to really figure out this is not what you went about doing. Okay. Choice E, which is the correct answer, talks about the total distance, and it's a must be true. Why? Because the total distance goes down, the total number of toll miles traveled on the road on the toll highway will also go down. Let's look at choice C. Choice C talks about the average length of trip on the toll highway. It says the average length will not decrease from its current level. Now, the question that you have to ask is what would what could offset the reduction in average length? So earlier, let's say each trip was 10 miles long on an average. Now it's 9 miles long. Okay. So what could offset the average length of trip? More trips, yes. Maybe you have more trips. So again, while this is a strengthener, it's not an assumption. It's not a must be true. Okay. And the same thing with choice D. All right. What did you learn from this question? Read carefully. Okay. What else? Majority is not always wrong. You want to get to the point where I want to get everyone to the point where in this group, if I give a 700 level question, uh, then 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 I want to see a majority get it right. Pretending is not, pre-thinking is key. Pretending is actually a very it's something that you don't want to use in the context of critical reasoning. But yeah, pre-thinking is important. You have to be specific in reducing the quorum. Absolutely, be very specific. Boil the information down into simple logic and verify for conditions. Okay, that's good. That's really specific. I really like that. Okay. I have some questions in the Q&A pod. Rishabh says, in order to get to a V30 or to V40, how many questions do we need to answer correctly? So it's, in my opinion, in an adaptive test, it's not the right question to ask. Let me tell you, but or rather, that number is not will never be the correct number. But if you're able to get to 60 to 65% accuracy on hard questions, and if you're able to express that on the test, you'll get a V40 fairly easily. That's my answer to you. Because if you get 65% accuracy on hard questions, mean that you already will have 90% accuracy on medium level questions. Okay. Man says, as I proceed with options, I tend to visualize the question better. Is that fine? No, it's not fine, man. That's a red flag for me. As you proceed with options, this means that you're not pushing yourself enough while reading the argument. You're not reading the argument slowly enough. So I want you to get better at reading the argument slowly, and visualizing it. Of course, there will always be some discoveries as you reject answer choices. Yes, but then 80% of that learning should happen before you read your first answer choice. Okay, that's a red flag for me. Priyadarshan says, can we get enough time to pre-think during the exam? Priyadarshan, if that were not the case, then we would not account for 70. We would not have accounted for 60% of all success stories on GMAT Club. Are there cases, Tukeba, I was going to come to your question itself. Are there cases where pre-thinking is not helpful? In the context of CR and RC, no, I have not found any of those cases. And the second question is, I've realized that I tend to get the answer right in the first attempt, but I miss out when I overthink. Yes, most people do that. Don't overthink. How do you overcome this? You just don't overthink. Just be confident in yourself. That's another piece that I want to tell people. A lot of people, when it comes to critical, the GMAT, they try and take the test differently than how they go about their taking their mock test. Some of them spend more time on the first time. Other really say, hey, I'm going to slightly modify my strategy to enhance my performance by 10 or 20 points. How many of you do that? How many of you tend to do that? Say, I'm gonna just, or have people who retakers, they go into the actual exam and say, I'm gonna modify my strategy slightly over here. Don't do that. Take the actual exam as if it's a mock test. You win or lose your score during your preparation phase. Your actual test has to be a manifestation of how you prepared. I'm getting the pre-thinking wrong. How do you improve on that? How do you improve on getting your pre-thinking? Abhishek has this question. I'm getting the pre-thinking wrong. How can I improve on that? What do you think my answer will be? No, it's not going to be practice. That's probably that's a good answer. Probably you're missing the conclusion. Visualize better. That's a much better answer. Yes. So the key thing over here is when you think about focusing on improving anything, a lot of us focus on the output. All right. Um, and that's one of the so when you think about does anyone over here work at Amazon or Microsoft? Anyone from Amazon, Microsoft over here? In fact, Google as well. Amazon, okay. When Amazon thinks about growth, what do they think about? Input variables or output variables? Actually, no. They think about input variables. The output, when you if you go back to thinking critical, thinking backwards, or working backwards, if you look at and read Ramcharan's book on how the Amazon system works, Amazon always thinks about input variables. When they think about customers, they think about, okay, how can I get items to them faster? How can I reduce their costs? Why? Because they know if they improve the selection, if they get items to them faster, if the items are cheaper, if the returns process is better, you will automatically get more customers. The same thing applies to CR, if or any aspect of the GMAT, where if you focus on getting better at visualizing information, if you focus on building the logical structure better, if you focus on translating the information in the argument into the falsification question, there is no reason why you won't be able to pre-think assumptions. This is not rocket science. Okay. The reason why you're not able to do this is because you're faltering at one of these three places. Does that make sense? When you think about Microsoft says, how can we make everyone more productive? How can we get organizations get more out of their employees? If they're able to do that, they can charge more. Their growth will happen automatically. So if you want to get better at rethinking, focus on the input variables. What are the input variables? The ability to visualize information, build that logical structure, and translate that falsification question into the context of the argument. Does that make sense? I got just one yes. How many of you are just saying, man, this session is heavy? How many of you find there's a lot that you've gotten? This is really, really heavy. Some of you probably are saying this is my brain's aching right now. And this is supposed to be heavy. It's supposed to be, because, and if it's not, that's also good. But if it's heavy, that's good too, because that's when you're learning things. Because at e-GMAT, we don't teach tricks because tricks don't work. Okay. Vibhor says these e-GMAT course lifetime free or limited months. It's limited months. We have, if you go on a buy page, you're going to really see that. Okay. How do you increase my speed of assimilation of arguments? Read slowly. That's the only way to increase speed. Read slowly, read carefully. As you read slowly and carefully, you're going to find you're going to be able to look at fragments of sentences and visualize them. As you focus on building that speed, you're going to find that your assimilation goes faster. Okay. Where do you get more pre-thinking exercises in the e-GMAT course? All right. So now we're going to do really strategic pausing works beautifully. Yes, absolutely. People who get to V45, V46, V47, they don't focus on solving questions quickly. They focus on making sure that everything that they answer is they are 100% certain, or as my co-founder says, 110% certain about it. If you can build that habit, if you can have that control over yourself, then you're going to succeed. And control is really important. Why? How many of you, excuse me, while you're studying, want to go from one question to the other? Sit into Get into a study session saying, I'm going to solve 10 questions today. And you're going to say, oh, I've spent 8 minutes, 10 minutes on this question. Let me go on to that next question. Why are those 10 questions important? Especially when you are at the beginning of your ability building process. People who get to V45, V46, which is 99 percentile, go with an attitude to really say, I'm going to make sure I understand everything. I'm able to visualize this. I'm going to, it's, and then the reason why that 10 question thing works is because you kind of tell yourself, I did my job today because I solved 10 questions. And that's probably not the right job you want to do. The job that you want to do is, I'm 100% certain of what I learned today, and I can very easily see how I can apply it when I read the next piece of text an hour from now, even when I'm not studying critical reasoning. If you do that, that's when you reach that level of understanding. That's when you become credible enough to get to a V40. Change that attitude, and you'll actually see different outcomes. As I say, change the input variables, the output will change automatically. The same input variables lead to very, very similar outputs. Okay. With that, are you guys ready? Do we have any SC sessions coming up? Yes, there are some coming up. Yes. And Tokeba says, I know the rules, but I take too long to solve them and get them wrong. First of all, SC is not about rules. I know about 5 rules in SC, and I can solve pretty much 95% of questions correctly. It's about meaning, it's about logic. Nothing on the GMAT is about rules. Let me just be very clear. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know the test. And I'll be happy to challenge them anywhere. Okay. Are you guys ready for the most challenging questions? Okay. We're going to do these questions one after the other. So they are difficult. Don't judge yourself on your performance in these questions. They are here to ensure that you understand what it takes to apply these, these principles in a more challenging scenario. So the way we will do this is the way we do a lot of our quant sessions as well. I'm going to give you a question, and then there's this thing called not answered. I want 30 of you to select not answered. That way, when you choose an answer choice other than not answered, I will call time. And while you're doing this, Rishabh has a question. Are there any freebies for those who get these questions correct? Rishabh, you will have the respect. You'll have my respect if you get these correct. But other than that, I think the biggest gift that I can give you is the gift of learning. It's- and those who get it wrong will also have my respect, because you put it right. As long as you try this, as long as I see your response in the poll question, it takes effort to 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 participate. You're coming out of your comfort zone. What you have at the bottom is a notes pane that says 0% done, which means no one's solved this question. As more and more people do this, I'm going to update this. Okay. With that, here is your first question. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, but 75% of you are done. Get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. You can see how people polled. Choices A and D are really popular. B is quite popular as well. C is somewhat popular. All right. With that, let's get the next poll here. This is our next poll. You guys know the drill. Not answered. The 30 people to say not answered, and then I'm going to show the next question, and then we'll discuss both these questions. Perfect. Let me remove broadcast results. Here is the next question. Good luck, guys. All right, 80% is are done. Let's just make sure. Let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. You can see this is how you guys poll. Choice D was D for Delta is really popular, but then choices B, C, and E, and actually A, B, C, and E also have an appreciable number. The most popular choice only has 42% of votes. All right, it's good. So, fun questions. Did you guys have fun solving these questions? No. Okay. Yes. No. Nah. All right. Wait. These are difficult questions. As I said, don't judge yourself on them. Again, it shouldn't depend on the answer. Let me just be very clear. I mean, yes, I understand getting an answer right is fun, but it should depend on. I mean, when you solve CR questions, do them because for the fun of them. It's take them on as a challenge, and you may get an answer right. But if you did 90% of the visualization correct, then that 10% is very easy to fix, and you're going to get similar questions right the next time. On the other hand, you may get a question correct, but But maybe you got it by chance, and then you might not be able to repeat that performance. So yeah, both these questions are difficult, really, really difficult questions. So let's kind of look at this over here. So let's visualize this. So the conclusion here is very simple. It says the number of V's wordlanders who received special program information did not increase significantly during this time period. So essentially what it's saying is in 94, if there were 1 million wordlanders who received special program information in 96, you have more or less 1 million as well. Okay. So again, this is only about V. These are not about people living outside of V. This is only about special program information. This is not about anything else. Is that clear to everyone? And it's only about 94 to 96. All right, good. Let's go. This is the argument structure. I'm going to pace up a bit because we've done this a few times. This is my main conclusion. Then why does the author, how does the author arrive at the conclusion? Why? Because the number of RDS equipped radios more or less remain the same. So in 94 and 96, they didn't increase a whole lot. But the number of transmitting stations more than doubled. They went from 250 to 600. Statement number one is a really important statement. It sets the context. It says, hey, if you want to receive that special program information, you need to have a transmitting station which has that technology also, and you also need a radio that also has this technology. In other words, that's very, very similar to cell phones. If you want to receive 5G, you need to have a 5G phone, and you also need to be in the range of a 5G tower. Okay. So this is your logical structure. The context says to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios, you need to be in the range. And between 94 and 96, you had a lot of, the number of radios remained unchanged, but you got a lot more transmitting stations. And based on this, the author makes this conclusion. Is the structure simple enough? Clear to you guys? Okay. Now we're going to go through the same process. You're going to go ask the same falsification question. Under what circumstances will there be a significant increase in the number of V's receiving RDS programming, even though the number of radios remain the same, and when we have a lot more stations? Can you give me scenarios in which I can break this conclusion? Can you tell me in what scenarios, or how will I be able to break this conclusion, shatter it? Get way more people to listen to RDS programming, even though I may have the same number of radios and I have a lot more transmitting stations. People share radio. Yes. Cafe stores. Yes. Start putting them in Starbucks. That's going to be there. The second thing is previous station. If people earlier, no one was on ring. That's a good way. It's not precise, but I understand the sentiment behind it. That you had these people all across Wordland who had the right radios, but only these ones, these guys over here were covered. Now you put new stations and you cover even these guys. In that case also, you despite the same number of uh, s- uh, radios, you get more people to listen in. Okay. Me hide my palette. Yeah. Okay. Is that clear? Possible scenarios are if these new stations broadcast to people who had the right radio, you had a 5G phone, but your provider didn't cater to your needs, but now your provider starts to cater to your needs, or you start putting these radios in Starbucks, and so way more people listen to them. Can you see both these scenarios shatter my conclusion? They falsify it. Okay. I want to see a few more yeses. I know this is a heavy session, but a few more yeses would be very useful. If these are my possible scenarios, first scenario is fairly simple. Uh, it's something that you guys experience every day. Let me bring in the whiteboard. First scenario is, let's say this is this rectangle is your word length, okay, and earlier, um, let's put crosses as people over here. These are people who are in wordland. Let's just uh, go back. These are people. Okay. And These are your transmitting towers. Let's just make sure. These are your transmitting towers over here. Let's make them slightly bigger. These are your transmitting towers. Okay. These transmitting towers are only, this is 94, are only transmitting to people on the left half of this. Now we bring in some new transmitting towers over here. Let's kind of bring these over here. So the new transmitting towers come over here. Then in that case, all the people in this side also get coverage. So even though they had the right radios earlier, they now get coverage. Is scenario one clear? People had the radios, but no transmitting towers existed next to them. Okay, if you are saying no, please put the question in the Q&A pod. With that, I'm going to move forward just because I think most people understand this. Okay, so your assumption is that new stations don't increase coverage and people per radio remain more or less the same, because these, if they don't really, if these things don't happen, then that shatters your conclusion. Okay, let's look at my answer choice analysis. Choice A, let's bring in your poll question here. RDS Technologies, this is how you guys polled. You can see how you guys polled. Choice A is my correct answer. 18 of you got that right. So choice A says, and it's a complex choice, few if any of RES equipped radio stations that begin broadcasting after 1994 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. So few if any, the translation of this is almost none. Of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94, these are your new radio stations. Okay, these are the new radio stations. These are the radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. Increase the coverage of RDS programming. This means that broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios means almost none of these new radio stations are put in areas where people earlier had the RDS radios but had no coverage. So what this is really saying is that almost none of the new radio stations increase that coverage of RDS programming. This is my correct answer. Why? Because essentially, if you negate this, the negation of this is at least some radio stations increase my coverage. If they do increase coverage, then you have new people who listen to RDS programming, and which means that I cannot make that conclusion that the number of people listening to RDS programming in 94 and 98 remain the same. Clear? Maybe they did not have. You see this RDS equipped radios? Does that address your maybe that did not have? Is that clear? I'm sorry, I removed that yes. Yeah, now you can really see why you made a mistake. You did not comprehend this answer choice. And again, despite getting the structure right, if you don't focus on reading the answer choices independently and then visualizing them and then asking, is that the correct answer? If you don't go through that process, you would still make a mistake. But the beauty of this is if you go through the last module in the CR course is an error log. And this is one of the classical error traps. You get everything right, but you don't focus on understanding what the answer choice is saying. And this is one of the key categories in your error log. Let's look at choice B. A lot of people chose choice B, if I remember, or quite a few of you chose choice B. Let's look at this over here, RDS. This is how you guys polled, but 19 of you chose, or 12 of you chose choice B. So I wouldn't say, there's still a lot. Choice B says, in 1996, most landers who lived in the listening area of an RDS station had an RDS radio. So you're going to use the word most. What does most mean? What does most mean? More than 50%. It could be 60, it could be 70, it could be 100. Oh, it's more than 50%. Okay. So let's kind of, for simplification, call this 70%. Okay. So what is my conclusion in the argument? What is the conclusion of my argument? What's the conclusion of this argument? The number of Verlanders receiving special program information in 94 and 96 was more or less the same. More people are not listening to RDS programming. Same number of people listen to the radio. That's a good way to simplify it, yes. So my question to you is it required that 70% of, for my conclusion to hold true, is it required that 70% of people have an RDS equipped radio in 94 and in 96? Is that required? Or in other words, will the conclusion not hold true if in 94, instead of this, 20% of people had an RDS equipped radio in 94 and the same 20% had an RDS equipped radio in 96? Will the conclusion not hold true? Is most required? The answer to that is no, most is not required, and hence this answer choice is incorrect. Again, understand what the conclusion is about. The conclusion is about the change in number of people between 94 and 96. So the absolute number of people in 94 or in 96 is immaterial. Choice C, not many of you chose. It talks about what happens when you add RDS technology to a radio station. Now we don't care about it. Why? Because for our conclusion, we need RDS technology. So what the impact that it has on other kind of programming is irrelevant to us. Okay, that's really, really important. Let's look at choice D. A lot of you chose choice D. Choice D says in 1996, Verlanders who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. Do we care about these people who don't have RDS radios? Could not receive any programming. Do we care about people, any programming? Do we care about people who don't have RDS radio? Absolutely not. Do we care about any programming? Absolutely not. So why is this wrong? It talks about the wrong people. It talks about the wrong programming. It's completely irrelevant to my conclusion. This was the most popular answer choice. My question to you is, why did you choose this? What tempted you about this answer choice? Many people see the word any and really just say, hey, any is rarely wrong on the GMAT. Let's choose that. But again, I want to understand what tempted you towards this answer choice and what did you learn from this? Basically, reason thinking no tech changes that happen. Okay, some people think that as well, and that's a good. It's good to really kind of bring this out. Now, remember this in the context of CR. If you're given a constraint in the argument, you're not gonna go outside of it. If it tells you that you need RDS radio to receive RDS programming, you cannot have tech changes. Your boss says that, hey, I want you to grow the revenue by $10 million and assume that we're going to provide 1 day shipping to the entire country, then you don't have to worry about whether you're going to get 1 day shipping or not and what's going to cost to get 1 day shipping. Your boss has already given you that piece over there. So imagine you have 1 day shipping and then give your proposal. Okay. Even if they do not have RDS radios, they can still listen to this. Yes, but any programming. It's about Verlanders who could not receive any programming, receive from the radio stations. Okay, this is not about them saying that whether they're going to go and insert in Starbucks and do that. This is about their own radios. Okay, so if you translated this into they're going to sit in Starbucks, then your translation is what needs to be learned, not the logical aspect of it. You're probably thinking right, you're not translating right. Okay. Same type of programming is immaterial. Okay. So key thing over here, complex looking argument, but overall, if you focus on understanding the question, and if you focus on translating the answer choices are difficult here, but if you focus on translating the answer choices into your own words, you're going to find life is fairly easy. Okay, this one's a very interesting argument. It's a beautiful argument. So what happened last year? Refuse, garbage. You could really just say incineration means burning. So we're collecting garbage. So last year, We collected a bunch of garbage and we sent it to incineration. This year, what are we going to do? What's the plan this year? We're going to recycle. We're going to separate for recycling. Yes. So last year, let's assume that the garbage, one trash can over here is one truck worth load of garbage. So how many truckloads did we burn last year or incinerate last year? If one trash can is no, can you count the number of trash cans? 10. Okay. Now this year we're going to recycle some and we're going to send some truckloads for incineration. Now my question for you is, if the same amount of refuse is collected this year, then how many trash cans or how many truckloads are we going to send for incineration? The amount of 5, right? So this is a simple question. Now my question to you is, if instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, if I collect 10 times as much refuse. So if this thing over here is 10x, if the amount of refuse collected here this year is 10 times, how many truckloads am I going to send for incineration? The amount of refuse collected is 10 times of what it was collected last year. How many truckloads am I going to send for incineration? Come on, I need at least 30 people to tell me the answer. It's a simple question. You have the argument right in front of you. If you collect 10 times as much garbage, how many truckloads am I sending for incineration? I have 22, 26, 26 answers. 4 more. Cool. I have 29. I need a few more answers. All right. Good. Let me end the poll. And 56% of you think it's going to be 50. You guys are wrong. 12% of you think it's going to be 100. You guys are wrong as well. Um, some of you think it's 25. Some of you think it's 10. The correct answer is 5. Choice A. People who chose 5, that's correct. Even if you collect 10 times as much refuse. And this is where translating language is important. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What it's saying is, regardless of how much garbage we collect, we are only going to send half as many trucks as we sent last year. Can you see this? It's a simple translation of English. And that's what happens when you read slowly and visualize information. If you go on GMAT Club, look at this question, you'll see 3 pages of doubts, and only towards the end people get to this. That's the beauty of language. That's what you need to learn if you truly want to be a 700, someone who gets to that 90th percentile ability in CR. And you can't do this by speed reading. You can only do this if you build your ability to visualize information. All right. So if we're going to send half as many truckloads for incineration, we'll recycle the remaining, then what's the only scenario in which I'm going to get more ash? What's the only scenario in which I'm going to get more ash if I'm sending half as many truckloads? What's my falsification scenario? The answer to this question. The only scenario is if we pack those truckloads so tightly that every truckload generates a lot more ash. Okay, as many of you are now saying, if the average ash generated per truckload is higher than what was generated last year because we packed them up so tightly. The assumption then, so if this is the scenario in which my conclusion breaks down, then my assumption is that my ash per truckload is lower than or very similar to what it was last year. That's really important. Okay. Can you see how this question is very similar to the highway miles question, where my assumption was the number of miles traveled, total distance traveled on the highway remains more or less the same. Okay. So with that, choice D is my correct answer. We can really see how many of you got this right. 42% got this right overall. Choice A says this year no materials that the city services could separate for recycling will be incinerated. This is something which is a must be true answer choice, but it's something that you can infer from the argument. It doesn't provide new information, hence this is wrong. Choice B talks about the cost of it, uh, and we don't care about the cost. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Again, doesn't matter because we're only going to get half as many truckloads. People who chose choice C, do you get why choice C is wrong? Okay. Choice D talks about the ash per truckload, which is a correct answer. You can see the negation test being applied over here. And choice E is talks about the total quantity of refuse, again as irrelevant. Why? Because we're only going to send half as many truckloads. So with that, what have you learned so far? What were your takeaways? What were your takeaways? Pre-think, how to assess assumption. Okay, use negation test. All right. Visualization. No speed reading, just quality reading. That's really good. Visualizing and pre-thinking. Read slowly. And the thing that you're going to really see is as you read slowly, build your visualization muscle, you're going to find speed happens automatically. But I can answer questions right now in about 75 to 80 seconds. But that's not how I got started. When I got started, it was 3.5 minutes. It's just, and I built my visualization muscle. As I built my visualization muscle, I got better. Okay. How do you pre-think within the scope of the argument, within the constraints? Learn better at translating information. Translate information from words to pictures. As long as you do that, you'll learn how to do this. And this is the same skill that you see in quant as well, where you translate the constraints, translate information from the question stem. And and this is where I think things there's certain things that are really, really important. Pre-thinking isn't rocket science, but it's a way for you to get to that 90th percentile efficiently. And you need fundamentals. What's Without fundamentals, you won't be able to pre-think correctly. And the fundamentals that you need, they start from learning how to visualize statements. Okay, because the reason why you make mistakes is you're going to falter in one of these four areas. A, you're unable to visualize information. B, you're unable to visualize the conclusion. C, you don't link them. And D, you don't understand the answer choices. And then every CR question is going to test you on all four of them. So you to excel, you've got to do all four correctly. Okay. But then if you want to achieve this mastery, you've got to go one step at a time, and which is where you've got to learn how to classify statements properly. If you're an e-GMAT student, make sure you go through the premise and conclusion modules. And you can really see it's about 2 hours of content, right, in premise and conclusion. If you want to learn how to visualize statements, one of our most comprehensive modules is our inference module. And this module teaches you how to visualize information. That's really, really relevant overall. Because without this, you won't be able to do this. Okay. And this is where we start with how do you visualize and draw inferences from a single statement? What's the impact of words only and all, some, most? Um, then we teach you how do you combine two statements. And each one of these activities is evaluated. So there's embedded quizzes in there where you learn and answer questions directly. Then you have practice quizzes, and then we increase the complexity in application files and then in practice files as well. Okay, and this I think is really really critical. How many of you, when you went through our inference course, just the inference part of this, said, "Man, this is a lot of detail. Why do I need to learn inference to this degree?" How many of you said that? There's the reason why this is there, because it lays the foundation for you to learn visualization. Then you go through the assumption module. This is the free trial aspect of assumption. Make sure you go through that. But if you are a paid student, it's a very detailed module. This is where you learn how to falsify things. You learn with pre-thinking in multiple contexts, where arguments just have logical gaps, where arguments compare to entities, where you're looking at segments. Then you do segments and entities together, and then you have your quant-based arguments. Then you have some assumption, some application files as well, where we increase the difficulty, and then you practice as well. And again, each one of these is evaluated. If you get a lower score, you get feedback to go do the revision again. And that's where the system constantly evaluates you, looks at your gaps, and tells you where you need to revise so that you perfect your skills as you move forward. Okay, and again, when you do this, you learn all four skills in the context of assumption. Then you do the same thing in evaluate, and then you do the same thing in strengthen as well as in weaken, and then you go about taking cementing quizzes, and make sure you cross the threshold, which is the 55% threshold overall. Is this time over here the time content or time taken by user? It's a time taken by user. So this, we track this over here. This is the time taken by user to go through this, and so we different people go through this in different times. So we track how long each person takes overall. So each of these learning activities sends about 100 to 150 data points to our platform. They are assessed, and the platform then combines those data points to give these scores overall. Okay. Now, about timing here, then this is really, really critical. You can really see in this case how someone's weighted accuracy has gone up as they've gone from 30 plus attempts to 16 to 30 attempts and to last 15 question attempts. And you can see how their timing has reduced. When you get better at visualizing, not only do you see, you're doing things much better, but you'll also see that you're getting faster overall. And that, I think, is very, very powerful in this case. Okay. Um, and once you do that, that's when you can refine to 98 percentile ability. Here you can see this is a 3D chart. This is hard questions. This is the person's accuracy in hard questions, and this is a V44 student overall. Okay. Um, Here's a guy who went from 570 to 740. It took about 4 months, and so this is a guy who taught. This guy is currently studying at Tuck, and so there's someone uh, who taught physics at an undergraduate level. He felt he'd do really well in CR. However, there were answer choices that trapped him. But once he started doing pre-thinking, spending that extra 5 to 10 seconds focusing on learning visualization, he was able to get to the correct answer fairly easily. So with that, start your pre-thinking journey, and go through the free trial, see if this is relevant for you. I see a bunch of you put in stuff where you say, hey, you need to figure out how long you need help with your study plan. If you need help with your study plan, you can get your personalized study plan here. Again, if you're an e-GMAT student, you already have access to this tool, but if you're not an e-GMAT student, then you can do that. Also, if you need help with GMAT Focus Edition, then that's over here. Let me also share the session PDF. So that you guys can download this as well. With that question in the Q&A pod, guys, let me answer the two questions that are here. One is, if you maintain 55 to 60% accuracy on hard questions, is that a guarantee for 40% or V40 plus score? If you have a 60% accuracy in hard questions, you get to a V38, V39 score. Again, you're assuming you can you do the test readiness right, 90% of the people who get there get to a V38, V39 score. 65% gets you a V42. So you are in that range. Okay. Course duration is, depending on how long you need. We have a 2 month, 4 month, and 6 month plan. It's the same course content. The duration, it's just the duration is different depending on if you're someone who's starting at a 500, most likely you need a 4 or a 6 month. Again, a lot of people, this go and people who are not sure, they either start with a 2 or a 4 month plan and then they do monthly extensions if they need. So that way they get the most flexibility. Um, with that, feedback on the webinar. What did you learn? What were your key takeaways? How are you going to change your behavior? What did you learn from the webinar? Short answer pod. More focus on pre-thinking. Okay. Subtleties of language. What else? Learned about learning the concepts and reading slowly. All right, that's good. And I know your brains are overloaded right now. Um, but I'd love to get some feedback, love to get some learnings overall. Um, because right after this, I'm going to go and pack my stuff and then in a couple of days, move to India. So your feedback would be the last thing that I'd be looking at before I close shop. But again, you're an e-GMAT student, your support system is still there. You get all your queries answered. All your doubts would be addressed by the SMEs. So none of that changes. Okay, visualize and read all options and the intended meaning. That's good. Pre-thinking, pre-think the breaks in logic. Great. Yeah, but thank you for the appreciation and the feedback. But I want to also really see how you're going to change your behavior. And thank you for that feedback. GMAT Focus Edition course. When will it start? When we see enough people. I mean, from our side, we have the world's most comprehensive IR course. So if you want to actually, let me also share the link to how will we support. So I want to really just see e-GMAT's plan for GMAT Focus Edition. That's here. It should come up as link number 3 over here. So yeah, so the course we will most likely start towards the middle of August because the official guide and the mocks come in around the 6th of June, and that's kind of what gives us the foundation. Now we've been working uh, over time to make sure that the foundation is there, every question type supported. Our tech platforms working on building the next generation of mocks and a bunch of other things. So the Focus Edition is going to start to become relevant more and more from August onwards itself, because you'd be able to take the test only in October. So yeah, we'll start that. And thank you very much for all the feedback. That's wonderful. So that's really great. And I hope to see you guys on egmat.com. Make sure you go through the free trial. Make sure you focus on learning things. And if you're an e-GMAT student, build that visualization muscle. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. Make sure you focus on learning rather than focus on going through the course, because it's learning that will help you do well. And if you focus on learning early on, you're going to find you go through the course a lot more quickly. Okay. All right, guys, thank you very much, and I will see you in a few days. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.